A broken saddle brings unexpected love. Rancher meets Apache woman Tom Callahan had spent most of his life in the wide, sun-baked deserts of Arizona. His ranch, passed down from his father and grandfather, was a patch of land where cattle roamed freely, and the horizon seemed endless. He knew every hill, every dry creek, and every cactus by heart. Life on a ranch was hard, but Tom liked it. He liked the simplicity, the quiet mornings, the smell of earth after rain. But it also demanded strength, patience, and constant attention. He was used to the work, yet sometimes he longed for something different, something unexpected. One morning, with the sun just beginning to warm the desert floor, Tom saddled his favorite horse, a steady brown stallion named Dusty. The horse had been with him through many seasons, through storms and blistering heat, through long rides over rocky paths. Today, Tom had a simple mission. He needed to deliver supplies to a neighboring ranch. It wasn't far, maybe a full day's ride at most, but the journey required care. The desert was beautiful, yes, but it could also be cruel if one wasn't careful. Tom checked his supplies one last time. Sacks of feed for the neighbor's horses, a small toolbox, and a few personal items he thought might be useful in case the journey took longer than expected. He tapped Dusty lightly on the neck, whispered, "Let's make it a good ride, boy," and started down the winding dirt path that led away from his ranch. The wind carried the scent of dry sagebrush, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk circled lazily in the sky. The day promised calm, and for a while Tom felt content the way only someone completely alone in nature could feel. The journey began smoothly. Dusty's hooves kicked up small clouds of dust as they moved steadily, the rhythmic sound almost soothing. Tom's mind wandered. He thought of the chores he had left behind, the cattle that would need water later, and the long hours he spent mending fences. But today, he allowed himself to drift from these thoughts. He enjoyed the quiet, the solitude. The desert had a way of making a man feel small and yet free, as if everything else in the world could wait. But the calm did not last. About halfway through the journey, on a narrow trail flanked by jagged rocks, Tom felt a sudden shift beneath him. Dusty stumbled slightly, and before he could react, the saddle gave way with a loud snap. Tom's heart jumped. He gripped the reins tightly, trying to keep his balance, but he knew immediately that the saddle was beyond simple repair. It had broken completely. The leather straps were torn and the wooden frame had cracked. Dusty whinnied softly, sensing his rider's unease. Tom sighed and slid carefully to the ground. He inspected the damage. The saddle had been old, worn by years of use, but he had not expected it to fail like this. He tried adjusting the straps, pressing the wood back into place, but it was no use. The saddle was ruined, and he was far from any help. The nearest town was miles away, and even the neighboring ranch was not as close as he had hoped. The desert stretched around him in every direction, vast and empty. Heat radiated from the ground, and the only sound was the soft rustle of dry brush. Tom knew he needed a plan quickly. Staying put meant waiting, and waiting could be dangerous in this sun. Tom tried to think like he had in emergencies before. He could tie some straps together to make a temporary fix, or maybe he could ride Dusty bareback. But the terrain was rough, full of rocks and uneven paths, and he knew that without a proper saddle, even Dusty could be injured. He walked around, examining the surroundings, looking for anything that could help. The desert, however, offered little beyond thorny bushes, scattered rocks, and the occasional coyote tracks. Frustration began to creep in, but Tom took a deep breath. He had been through hard times before, and he knew panic would not help. As he worked, he noticed movement in the distance. At first, he thought it might be a bird, a hawk, or maybe a raven, but the figure moved differently. It was deliberate, cautious, and slow. He squinted, shielding his eyes from the bright sun. A woman emerged from behind a cluster of mesquite trees. She was dressed simply, wearing clothes that seemed suited for the desert, practical and comfortable. Her movements were careful, almost graceful. Tom's first instinct was to be cautious. He had been alone for a long stretch, and the desert could be dangerous. But there was no threat in her posture, no hint of aggression. She simply watched him from a distance. "Hello," she called softly, her voice carrying lightly across the dry land. Tom waved back, unsure of what else to do. He tried to signal that he needed help, but words seemed unnecessary. The woman, noticing his predicament, approached more confidently. In her hands, she carried a small bundle of tools and leather strips, as if she had been prepared for moments just like this. Her presence was calm and steady, a contrast to the panic he had felt moments ago. "I can help," she said. "You won't get far like that." Tom blinked, a little surprised. Her accent was subtle, and there was a strength in her tone that made him believe her. He nodded, grateful but wary. "I appreciate it," he said. "The saddle, it's beyond my repair skills." She smiled faintly and knelt beside the broken saddle, inspecting it carefully. Her fingers moved quickly, skillfully, as she examined the straps and the cracked frame. "We can make a temporary fix," she said. "It won't be perfect, but it will hold." Tom watched, impressed. He had seen many people in his life, but few moved with such ease and confidence, especially in the harsh desert conditions. There was something about her that seemed connected to the land, as if she belonged to it in a way he did not fully understand. While she worked, Tom offered what little assistance he could. He handed her tools, held Dusty steady, and watched the process. She explained what she was doing, how the straps would need to be tied, how the cracked wood could be reinforced just enough to ride safely. He listened, learning quickly, realizing that her knowledge of the desert and its ways was vast. For someone so young, she carried the wisdom of generations, and Tom felt both respect and admiration for her. By late afternoon, the temporary repair was complete. Dusty shifted his weight cautiously, testing the saddle, and Tom carefully climbed back on. The saddle held, not perfectly but enough to continue the journey. Tom exhaled in relief. "Thank you," he said sincerely, tipping his hat. "I don't know what I would have done without you." She nodded, her eyes calm and steady. "The desert has its ways," she said. "Sometimes it teaches you lessons the hard way. Today it brought me here." Tom smiled faintly at her words, feeling that there was more meaning than he could yet understand. They talked briefly, exchanging names and simple pleasantries. Her name was Ayana. He noticed how her eyes reflected both strength and kindness, how her presence seemed to make the desert less harsh, more alive. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the sand and rocks, Tom realized that this encounter, unexpected and strange, had changed something in him. The day had begun as a simple trip to deliver supplies, and now it had become something entirely different. He felt a curiosity he had not felt in years, a sense that the world might hold surprises even for someone who thought he knew every corner of it. That evening, as Tom rode slowly toward the neighboring ranch, the saddle secure for now, he kept thinking about Ayana. He thought about the way she had moved, the calm confidence she carried, and the way she had helped without hesitation. He felt a strange mix of gratitude and intrigue. Who was she, really? And how had fate led her to him in the vast emptiness of the desert? By the time he reached a small ridge overlooking the next valley, Tom knew one thing for certain. This was not the last time he would see her. The desert was wide, yes, but somehow it had brought them together, even in the most unexpected way. The sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in gold and red, and Tom felt, for the first time in a long while, that life had a way of surprising those who kept moving forward, even when the path seemed uncertain. The broken saddle, once a source of frustration and worry, had become something else entirely, a reason to pause, to notice, to meet someone who might change his life forever. And as Tom guided Dusty toward the distant ranch, he carried with him a quiet hope, a sense that the desert still had stories to tell, and that he had just become part of one of them. Tom had thought the day's surprises were over once he reached the neighboring ranch. Yet the memory of Ayana, the young Apache woman who had appeared seemingly from nowhere, stayed with him. He could still see her calm, confident movements as she repaired his broken saddle, hear the quiet strength in her voice. There was something about her that felt connected to the desert itself, a natural harmony he had never noticed in anyone before. For the first time in years, Tom felt a curiosity he couldn't ignore. The next morning, Tom returned to his own ranch, attending to his cattle and chores as usual. Life here was routine, feeding the animals, repairing fences, checking the water troughs, but the memory of Ayana lingered. He kept thinking about how she had approached him without fear, how skilled she was with her hands, and how she seemed to understand the land better than anyone he had ever met. Dusty, sensing his rider's restless mood, nudged him gently as if to remind him that the world was still large, but the desert had a way of guiding those willing to notice. A few days later, Tom found himself riding back toward the same trail. He tried to convince himself it was only to check his supply route, but deep down, he knew he hoped to see her again. The desert stretched endlessly, golden and warm under the sun, and he rode slowly, paying attention to every rock and bush, every sound in the quiet landscape. Hours passed, and just as he began to think he might have missed her, he noticed a figure in the distance, moving gracefully along the trail. His heart lifted. It was Ayanna. She had recognized him too, and when their eyes met, she offered a small, welcoming smile. Tom returned it, feeling a strange mix of relief and excitement. There was no awkwardness between them, only a shared understanding that the desert had brought them together once and might do so again. He guided Dusty closer, keeping his movements calm, and she stopped to greet him properly this time. "You're back," she said, her voice light but steady. "I thought I might check the trail," Tom replied, shrugging. "I guess I wanted to see if everything was still all right." They spent the day together, walking along a dry creek and observing the small signs of life hidden in the arid land. Plants with roots reaching deep into the soil, birds skimming low across the sand, and insects moving in patterns only someone familiar could notice. Ayanna taught Tom to identify edible plants, showed him how to find water in unlikely places, and explained how to interpret the subtle signs of the desert environment. Tom listened carefully, amazed at her knowledge and at the way she could move through the terrain without leaving a trace. As they walked, Tom told her about his life on the ranch. He spoke of his parents, who had worked the land with tireless dedication, of the cattle that had been in the family for generations, and of the challenges of keeping a ranch alive in such a harsh climate. Ayanna listened patiently, her eyes thoughtful. She shared stories of her own family and her community, speaking of traditions, celebrations, and the respect they held for the land. They spoke slowly, letting each story linger, each moment building a bridge between two worlds that had seemed so separate before. Tom realized that he was learning more than just desert survival from her. He was learning patience, humility, and a new way of seeing the world. Ayanna had a quiet wisdom, one that didn't demand attention but naturally earned it. He noticed small details about her, the way her hands moved confidently, the way she noticed even the smallest changes in the environment, the gentle smile she offered when he asked a question. Each detail made him feel more connected to her, more curious about the person she was. By late afternoon, they found themselves sitting on a large, flat rock overlooking a small valley. The sky was a canvas of soft oranges and purples as the sun began to set. Tom felt a calmness he had not experienced in years. He realized that the simple act of traveling through the desert, which had begun as a routine task, had become an unexpected adventure because of Ayanna's presence. "Thank you for showing me all this," he said quietly. "I've been here my whole life, and yet I've missed so much." He was amazed at how easily conversation had flowed between them, how natural it felt to walk and talk side by side. There was no pretense, no need to impress. Their connection seemed rooted in mutual respect and understanding. He felt comfortable in a way he had rarely felt with anyone outside his family. Over the next few weeks, Tom found reasons to travel the trail more often. He brought small gifts, freshly baked bread, coffee, or tools he thought might be useful. Ayanna would often greet him with a quiet smile, sometimes sharing her meals or showing him clever ways to make work easier in the harsh desert conditions. Each encounter deepened their trust. Tom began to realize that the desert itself had played a role in bringing them together. The vastness, the solitude, and the shared struggles of the land had created a space where friendship, and perhaps something more, could grow. One evening, after a long day of work on his ranch, Tom rode out to the trail once again. Dusty moved steadily beneath him, sensing his rider's anticipation. When he reached the grove where he had first met Ayanna, he found her sitting beside a small fire, tending it carefully. The sight of her in the warm glow of the fire made his chest tighten unexpectedly. She looked up as he approached, her eyes meeting his, and for a moment the world seemed to shrink to just the two of them. "Tom," she said softly, as if greeting an old friend. "Ayanna," he replied, feeling a warmth in his voice he could not hide. They spent that evening talking more deeply than before. Tom shared stories of his childhood, of dreams he had set aside to maintain the ranch, and of moments of loneliness he had often felt in the vast desert. Ayanna spoke of her hopes, her desire to see the world beyond the land she loved, and of her pride in her heritage. Each story was met with attentive listening, each silence filled with mutual understanding. As the stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky, Tom realized that this friendship was different from any he had experienced. It was not based on necessity, nor on proximity. It was based on choice, on the deliberate act of sharing time and knowledge. Iana had chosen to trust him, and he had chosen to open himself to her. It was rare, he thought, to find someone with whom the world felt both larger and smaller at the same time. By the time Tom rode back to his ranch that night, the temporary saddle repair seemed like a distant memory. What had begun as a simple act of help had turned into a connection that neither of them had anticipated. The desert had brought them together in a way that was quiet, subtle, and powerful. Tom felt a new kind of respect for the land and for the people who truly understood it. He also felt something new for Iana, a sense of curiosity, admiration, and the gentle beginnings of care. In the following days, their encounters continued. Sometimes they worked together on small tasks along the trail. Sometimes they simply walked and shared stories. Each day, Tom discovered new layers of Iana's character: her patience, her intelligence, her humor, and her unwavering respect for the land. In turn, Iana began to notice Tom's kindness, his humility, and his quiet determination. The bond between them grew slowly but surely, like a plant taking root in the desert soil. Tom knew that their friendship might not be understood by everyone. He had grown up in a community where differences could sometimes breed suspicion. Yet in the vast openness of the desert, those boundaries felt less important. What mattered was trust, respect, and a willingness to learn from each other. And in that sense, Tom and Iana were both fortunate and fortunate in equal measure. As Part 2 closes, Tom looked across the horizon, feeling a strange anticipation. The desert, which had always seemed so familiar, now felt alive with possibilities. He did not yet know what the future held, nor did he understand the depth of the bond forming between him and Iana. But he knew one thing for certain. Their meeting, sparked by a broken saddle, had set in motion a journey neither of them could have predicted. And for Tom, that journey was just beginning. Days turned into weeks, and the bond between Tom and Iana continued to grow in ways neither had expected. What had begun as a chance meeting in the desert had slowly evolved into a friendship rooted in trust, shared experiences, and mutual respect. Every time Tom rode out along the dusty trail, he felt a mix of anticipation and calm, knowing that he might see Iana and spend the day learning something new about her world, and in the process about himself. That morning, the sun had barely risen, casting soft light across the desert hills. Tom saddled Dusty with practiced care, making sure the horse was ready for the journey ahead. Though the trail was familiar, each ride now carried the promise of something beyond routine work. He had made plans to meet Iana at a shaded grove near a small stream she had shown him days ago. It was a place rich with desert plants, with water that reflected the sky in its quiet pool, and it felt like a hidden sanctuary in the vast openness of the land. When Tom arrived, Iana was already there, crouched near the edge of the stream, carefully examining a cluster of desert plants. She glanced up as he approached and smiled. "Good morning, Tom," she said warmly. "I thought I might show you how to identify some of these herbs. They have many uses both for food and medicine." Tom nodded, impressed by her knowledge. "I'm glad you're willing to teach me," he said, dismounting Dusty. "I want to understand the land the way you do." He felt a sense of humility as he spoke, realizing how much he had taken for granted while living on the ranch all his life. Iana's presence made him see the desert not as empty or harsh, but as full of subtle signs and hidden treasures, waiting for someone willing to notice. For hours they walked together, Iana pointing out plants with delicate leaves, small flowers that bloomed despite the dry soil, and roots that could sustain life in times of scarcity. She explained how each plant had been used by her people for generations, sharing stories that connected the lessons of the land with history, tradition, and survival. Tom listened attentively, absorbing every word. He found himself marveling not just at the information she shared, but at the gentle way she delivered it, with patience and care. As they worked together, Tom realized that Iana had a way of teaching that went beyond facts. She showed him how to move carefully across the desert floor, how to notice changes in the soil, how to listen to the wind for signs of approaching weather. He learned that the desert was not a simple place. It was a living, breathing environment, demanding respect and understanding. Through her guidance, he began to see patterns he had never noticed, to feel the rhythm of the land in a new and profound way. Their conversations flowed easily. Tom shared stories of his life on the ranch, the challenges of raising cattle, the lessons he had learned from his father, and the quiet satisfaction that came from working hard and seeing results. Yana listened with interest, occasionally asking questions, sometimes offering her own observations about life and community. Their words built a bridge between two very different experiences, two different worlds that, in that moment, felt remarkably close. During a break, they sat on a flat rock near the stream, drinking water and letting the silence of the desert settle around them. The wind moved softly, carrying the scent of sage and dry earth. Tom noticed the quiet strength in Ayana's eyes and the calm way she held herself. He had met people before, of course, but there was something unique about her, a combination of wisdom, confidence, and gentleness that drew him in. He felt a sense of trust he had rarely felt with anyone outside his family. Yana noticed his gaze and smiled faintly. "You are thinking too much," she said lightly. "The desert teaches you patience, Tom. It teaches you to observe, not just to act." Tom laughed softly, feeling both amused and grateful. "I suppose I've always been more of a doer than an observer," he admitted. "But I think I'm starting to understand what you mean." He realized that this friendship, growing slowly day by day, was changing him in subtle ways. He was learning to slow down, to notice the small details, to appreciate life's quiet moments instead of always rushing toward the next task. As the day wore on, they came across a small grove of mesquite trees where Ayana suggested they take a longer rest. The shade offered relief from the sun, and the gentle murmur of the stream nearby created a peaceful atmosphere. Here, she shared more of her personal stories, about her family, the lessons she had learned from her elders, and the responsibilities she felt to her community. Tom listened, fascinated by the depth of her experience and the quiet pride she held in her heritage. He realized that there was so much he had not understood about the world beyond his ranch, about people whose lives were shaped by different values and traditions. Tom, in turn, spoke about the ranching life, about how every day brought a mix of hard work and small victories. He shared stories of cattle lost and found, fences repaired after storms, and the long hours spent in solitude, thinking and reflecting. Yana listened, asking thoughtful questions that revealed her genuine interest. Through these conversations, a bond of trust deepened. They were learning to respect each other's perspectives, to value each other's knowledge, and to offer support without judgment. By late afternoon, they began walking back toward the trail. The desert was bathed in golden light, and the long shadows of the cacti stretched across the sand. Dusty moved steadily beside Tom, and Ayana walked nearby, her presence a comforting rhythm alongside the quiet sounds of the desert. As they moved, Tom realized that he no longer saw the land as just a workplace. It had become a shared space, a place where connection, learning, and understanding were possible. In the days that followed, their meetings became more frequent. Tom found himself planning trips to the trail not out of necessity, but because he genuinely wanted to spend time with Ayana. Sometimes they worked on practical tasks together, repairing small tools, tending to desert plants, or marking safe routes through the more rugged parts of the land. Other times, they simply walked and talked, enjoying the companionship and the comfort of shared silence. Each day strengthened their friendship and deepened their mutual respect. Tom also began to notice small changes in himself. He felt more patient, more observant, and more aware of the subtleties of life on the ranch. Yana's influence was quiet but powerful, shaping the way he approached problems and challenges. He realized that learning from her was not just about surviving the desert. It was about understanding life in a broader, more thoughtful way. And in turn, he saw that his own practical skills and knowledge of the land could help Ayana in ways she might not have expected, creating a balance between their experiences. One evening, after a long day, Tom and Ayana sat on a hill overlooking the desert. The sun had set, and the sky was a tapestry of deep purples and soft blues, with stars beginning to shine in the distance. They were both quiet for a while, simply watching the vast landscape stretch out before them. Tom felt a sense of peace he had rarely experienced. The desert, once lonely and harsh, now felt alive with possibility and connection. "You've changed the way I see things," Tom said quietly, breaking the silence. Iana looked at him, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "And you've changed the way I move through the world," she replied. "We learn from each other even if we do not always notice it." Tom smiled. He realized that their relationship had grown beyond simple friendship. There was trust, admiration, and a quiet understanding that neither could ignore. What had started with a broken saddle and a chance meeting had evolved into something deeper, a partnership of respect, knowledge, and shared experiences. Each moment together added another layer to the bond they were forming, a bond that promised to endure the challenges of the desert and the world beyond. As they walked back to their separate homes that evening, Tom felt a sense of anticipation for the next meeting. The desert, vast and unpredictable, had brought them together, and he now understood that their journey was only beginning. In Ayana, he had found someone who challenged him, inspired him, and made the world feel richer, more complex, and more alive. And for the first time in a long while, he looked forward to the days ahead, knowing that the desert had more lessons to teach, and that he would not face them alone. As summer settled into the Arizona desert, the days grew hotter and the sun more relentless. Tom and Ayana had spent weeks walking the trails, learning from each other, and slowly building a bond that neither had expected. Yet, with the joys of companionship came the reality of challenges that tested both their patience and their trust. Life in the desert was never easy, and the harsh conditions reminded them that even the strongest bonds could be strained if not nurtured carefully. One morning, Tom rode out early, Dusty moving steadily under him, the trail shimmering in the heat. He had noticed that the water in the nearby streams was lower than usual. The drought had begun earlier than expected this year, and the land, usually resilient, showed signs of strain. Cattle on his ranch had already begun to appear restless, searching for water, and he knew that if the shortage continued, it could become serious. Tom's heart tightened with worry. He had relied on his knowledge, his tools, and his experience to manage difficult seasons before, but this drought felt different, more relentless, more pressing. He found Ayana at their usual meeting spot near a shaded grove. She was sitting beneath a mesquite tree, observing the desert floor. Tom could tell immediately from her expression that she had noticed the drought too. The calm confidence she usually carried was tinged with concern. "The water is low," Tom said plainly. "I've checked the main streams near the ranch and it's not much. The cattle are restless and I'm afraid if this keeps up, they'll start suffering." Ayana nodded thoughtfully. "I've seen this before," she said. "The land will teach you lessons you don't want to learn. But there are ways to manage it. We must plan carefully, use what we have wisely, and pay attention to signs the desert gives us." Together, they walked through the nearby hills, examining the plants and water sources. Yana pointed out hidden wells, small underground channels, and even patches of moisture that could sustain life for a while longer. Tom listened, absorbing every detail. He realized that her knowledge was not just practical, it was a form of wisdom born of generations living in harmony with the desert. Without her guidance, he might have missed these subtle but crucial signs. The next few days were spent working tirelessly. Tom repaired old water troughs and dug small channels to capture runoff from rare desert rains. Yana guided him in creating temporary water reservoirs and suggested clever ways to ration water for both animals and crops. They worked long hours, side by side, their hands dirty, their muscles aching, yet their determination never wavered. Through their shared labor, their bond strengthened. They were no longer just friends sharing knowledge. They were partners facing a common challenge, relying on each other's strengths to survive the harsh reality of the desert. Yet challenges were not limited to the land alone. Some neighbors began to speak quietly about Tom's frequent meetings with Ayana. In a community where differences often sparked suspicion, a rancher spending time with an Apache woman raised eyebrows. Rumors were whispered, glances exchanged, and Tom could sense subtle disapproval. He felt frustration at the narrow-mindedness of some people, but he also knew that confrontation would solve nothing. Instead, he focused on the work at hand and on the trust he shared with Ayana. Ayana, too, faced her own pressures. She had family responsibilities, cultural expectations, and duties within her community that demanded her attention. Some elders expressed concern that she was spending too much time away from her people. She listened respectfully, but her heart was pulled toward the friendship and something deeper that had developed with Tom. Balancing these expectations with her personal feelings was challenging, and she confided in him during quiet moments by the stream. "I want to help and I want to be here," she said one evening, tossing a small stone into the water. "But I also have responsibilities. I cannot ignore them. It is not simple to find balance between what I must do and what I choose to do." Tom nodded, understanding. "I know. And I don't want to make it harder for you. But I also know that having you here makes all the difference. I need your help, and more than that, I enjoy your company. We'll find a way to make it work." Through careful planning, patience, and compromise, they began to find solutions. Iana adjusted her visits to balance her duties with time spent guiding Tom, while Tom adapted his routines to make the most of her presence. They learned to communicate clearly, to anticipate challenges, and to support one another without overstepping boundaries. The desert, harsh and unpredictable, became not just a place of struggle, but a teacher, showing them the value of cooperation, respect, and understanding. One particularly difficult day, the heat was nearly unbearable, and Dusty grew restless under the sun. Tom had checked the water troughs only to find some of them nearly dry. Anxiety gripped him as he realized the strain the cattle were under. Iana, noticing his concern, suggested a temporary solution, a method she had learned from elders in her community. It required digging shallow channels that could collect condensation and rainwater, a labor-intensive task that needed both strength and precision. Together, they worked through the afternoon, hands blistered, sweat running down their faces, yet neither complained. There was a rhythm to their labor, a silent understanding between them. Yana encouraged Tom to pace himself, teaching him how to conserve energy while accomplishing more than he thought possible. The day's work was exhausting, yet by evening, they had created several small water catchments, enough to sustain the cattle until the next rain. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the desert sky with fiery shades of orange and red, Tom and Ayana sat together on a large boulder overlooking the valley. Dusty grazed nearby, content and tired. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the shared satisfaction of hard work well done. "You've taught me more in these weeks than I thought I could learn in a lifetime," Tom said quietly. "I never realized how much the desert could teach if only I paid attention." Yana smiled. "And you've taught me something too," she replied. "Even the land is easier to face with a friend. You have patience, determination, and a respect for life that is rare. Together we can handle more than we could alone." Their shared victories over the challenges of the land strengthened more than just the ranch. It strengthened their bond. Trust grew into admiration, and admiration began to bloom into something gentler, something neither of them fully named yet. The difficulties they faced together revealed their character, their reliability, and their care for each other. Every problem they solved, every obstacle they overcame, became a thread in the invisible tapestry connecting their lives. But challenges were still present. One morning, as Tom inspected the cattle, a neighbor rode up, curiosity and judgment in his eyes. "Tom," he said carefully, "I hear you've been spending a lot of time with Ayana. People are talking, about differences, traditions." Tom looked the man in the eye, steady and calm. "I'm aware of what people think," he replied. "But what matters is doing the right thing. We're working together, solving real problems, respecting the land, and learning from each other. That's all that matters." The neighbor paused, unsure how to respond, and eventually rode off without another word. Tom exhaled, relieved but thoughtful. He knew that societal pressures and prejudices could never fully be ignored. But he also knew that the bond he shared with Ayana was based on far more important things: trust, respect, shared experiences, and genuine care. By the end of the week, a sense of quiet accomplishment filled both their hearts. They had faced the trials of the desert, navigated social pressures, and managed responsibilities that might have overwhelmed others. They had done so together. And in that togetherness, a subtle but undeniable connection had formed. As part 4 closes, the desert lay in a tranquil hush, the orange glow of sunset reflecting on the sand and rocks. Tom and Ayana sat side by side, sharing a rare moment of rest. Their hands, once busy with labor, now rested loosely, their shoulders brushing occasionally. Neither spoke, but both felt the deep satisfaction of having faced challenges, having learned from one another, and having grown closer through shared effort. The desert had tested them, but in doing so, it had also taught them something far more valuable: That trust, respect, and shared purpose could bring people together in ways the heart might never anticipate. The drought, the work, and the social pressures were still present. Life in the desert would always bring new challenges. But Tom knew, as he watched the first stars appear in the darkening sky, that he would not face them alone. And for Ayanna, as she glanced at him and smiled faintly, the knowledge that they could navigate hardships together was a comfort she had not known she needed. The desert, with all its hardships and beauty, had become a place of connection, of learning, and of the quiet beginnings of something neither Tom nor Ayanna could yet fully name. But both sensed it deeply with every shared moment, every lesson learned, and every step taken. Together, the desert was quiet that morning, calm and still as the first light of dawn stretched across the horizon. Tom mounted Dusty with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt before. Weeks of shared experiences with Ayanna had changed him in ways he was only beginning to understand. Their friendship had grown into something deeper, though neither had spoken it aloud. Yet every glance, every conversation, and every moment of shared effort carried the unspoken acknowledgement of their connection. Today, Tom felt certain that the time had come to take the next step, not just in their work, but in their lives. He rode slowly along the familiar trail, his mind reflecting on everything that had led him here. The broken saddle that had first brought Ayanna into his life seemed like a distant memory, yet it had been the spark that had set their story in motion. Without that unexpected accident, he might never have met her, never shared the long walks across the desert, never felt the quiet comfort of her presence. The thought brought a soft smile to his face as he approached the grove where she often waited. Ayanna was already there, tending a small fire and arranging a few tools she had brought for their morning work. When she noticed Tom, her face lit with a smile that made his heart lift. "Good morning," she said, her voice carrying lightly in the still air. "You're early." "I wanted to be here," he replied, dismounting carefully. "There's something I need to say to you today." He hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to start, but the quiet confidence he had grown to admire in Ayanna gave him courage. She looked at him with gentle curiosity, waiting patiently. Tom took a deep breath. "Ayanna, over the past weeks, we've faced challenges together, the drought, the work, the long days in the desert. And through all of it, I've realized something important. I don't want to face the rest of my life without you. I care about you more than I ever expected." For a moment, Ayanna said nothing. The desert seemed to hold its breath, the wind still, the sun warm but gentle. Then she smiled softly, a mixture of relief and affection in her eyes. "Tom, I care about you too," she admitted. "I have felt it for some time, but I did not know how to say it. The desert has been our teacher, showing us patience, trust, and understanding. And it has shown me that I want to be with you as we face life together." The moment was quiet but full of meaning. The trust and respect they had built over countless hours of work, shared knowledge, and gentle conversation had now blossomed into love, quiet, steady, and sincere. They sat together on a nearby rock, letting the warmth of the sun and the stillness of the desert settle over them. There was no rush, no dramatic declaration, just two people who had found each other in a place where survival often came first, and the heart had to be careful. In the weeks that followed, their connection deepened even further. Together, they continued to manage the ranch and the desert, learning new ways to work with the land and preserve its resources. Tom introduced Ayanna to more of his ranching responsibilities, and she offered insights that improved their efficiency and care for the animals. They worked side by side, their partnership seamless, each relying on the strengths of the other. The desert, once a solitary and harsh environment, had become a shared space of growth, learning, and love. Their bond was also noticed by others, though slowly. Some neighbors who had once whispered and watched with suspicion began to see the results of their cooperation. The ranch thrived despite the drought, the land showed signs of renewed life, and their shared efforts could not be ignored. Respect replaced skepticism, and while not everyone fully understood their relationship, the strength of their connection was undeniable. One evening, after a long day of work, Tom and Ayanna sat on the ridge overlooking the ranch. The sun had set, and the sky glowed with brilliant shades of orange and violet, gradually fading into deep indigo. Dusty grazed quietly nearby, the only sound the soft rustle of the desert wind. Tom reached for Ayanna's hand, feeling the warmth and comfort that had grown between them. "I never thought a broken saddle would lead to this," he said with a soft laugh. I thought today would be just another routine morning on the trail. Yana smiled, squeezing his hand gently. Life has a way of surprising us, she said. Sometimes the hardest lessons lead to the most beautiful outcomes. They spoke long into the evening, sharing hopes and dreams for the future. Tom imagined expanding his ranch, incorporating some of the techniques Yana had taught him to better manage water and land resources. Yana dreamed of preserving her community's knowledge of the desert while embracing new opportunities alongside Tom. They spoke openly, honestly, and with a shared vision that felt as natural as the desert itself. As night fell and stars filled the sky, Tom realized that this connection was more than companionship. It was a partnership built on shared values, mutual respect, and love born from trust. The hardships they had faced, the drought, social pressures, and the challenges of the land, had not weakened their bond but strengthened it. Together, they had found resilience, understanding, and hope. In the following months, their partnership became visible to everyone. They hosted neighbors and travelers at the ranch, demonstrating the strength and skill they had developed through shared work. Tom showed others the methods Yana had taught him for conserving water and managing the land sustainably. Yana shared stories of her heritage, offering lessons about balance, patience, and respect for the environment. Their collaboration inspired those around them, showing that differences could be a source of strength rather than division. Through it all, their personal bond deepened. They shared quiet moments under the stars, early mornings riding along trails, and long afternoons working side by side. Each moment, whether filled with conversation, laughter, or silence, strengthened their love. They learned each other's habits, admired each other's strengths, and supported each other through doubts and fears. The desert, which had once been a place of solitude and survival, had become a landscape of love, connection, and shared dreams. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant mountains, casting long shadows across the land, Tom and Ayana sat together overlooking the valley. Dusty rested nearby, and the air was calm and warm. Tom reached into his pocket and pulled out a small handcrafted pendant, a simple piece made of leather and stone, reflecting both of their worlds. "I wanted to give this to you," he said softly, holding it out. "A reminder of the desert, of the lessons we've learned, and of the bond we share. It may be small, but it carries everything I feel for you." Yana took the pendant carefully, her eyes reflecting both surprise and deep affection. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "And so thoughtful, I will treasure it always." She leaned closer, resting her head lightly on his shoulder. In that moment, words were unnecessary. The pendant symbolized more than love. It represented trust, shared experience, and the journey they had taken together. As the stars began to twinkle above, they sat quietly, letting the desert's calm surround them. The broken saddle that had started it all now seemed like a distant memory, a small twist of fate that had brought them together. Their lives, once separate and defined by routine and survival, had intertwined in ways they could never have predicted. The desert had tested them, guided them, and ultimately given them something precious, each other. In the weeks and months that followed, Tom and Ayana continued to thrive together. Their love was steady, grounded in friendship, respect, and shared experience. They faced new challenges with confidence, knowing they had each other to rely on. The ranch flourished under their combined care, and their partnership became an example to those around them, showing that differences could unite rather than divide. And in the quiet moments, when the sun set over the endless horizon, they would sit together, holding hands, sharing stories, and watching the desert bloom in its subtle, beautiful way. The broken saddle had brought them together, but it was their shared journey, trust, and love that ensured they would stay together. They had found something rare and enduring, a partnership of heart, mind, and spirit, built not just on chance, but on choice. The desert stretched out before them, vast and eternal, but it no longer felt lonely. With each other, they had found warmth, companionship, and love that could withstand any challenge. And as they rode back to the ranch, side by side, their hearts felt full, knowing that their story, born from a broken saddle, tempered by hardship, and nurtured by trust, was only the beginning of a life they would build together.